I arrived at the Stanley Hotel on a crisp autumn afternoon, the kind where the air carries a faint chill, hinting at the winter to come. The hotel stood grand and imposing against the backdrop of the Rockies, its white facade gleaming in the weak afternoon sun. I had long been fascinated by tales of the paranormal, and the Stanley Hotel, with its storied past and reputation for hauntings, seemed like the perfect place to explore my curiosities. The drive up the winding mountain road had been picturesque, but as I approached the hotel's entrance, a sense of foreboding settled over me. The building, though beautiful, had an aura of something ancient and unsettled. Perhaps it was the knowledge that this very place had inspired Stephen King to write The Shining that made me shiver, or maybe it was something more. Inside, the hotel was bustling with activity. Tourists milled about, cameras flashing as they captured the historic interiors. The lobby was a mix of old-world charm and modern amenities, with its grand staircase and vintage furnishings juxtaposed against the hum of modern conversation. I checked in at the front desk, where a young woman with a bright smile handed me my room key and welcomed me to the Stanley. "You're in room 217, she said, her smile never wavering. "That's one of our more interesting rooms. Enjoy your stay." I nodded, trying to ignore the slight unease her words stirred in me. Room 217. The very room where King had stayed, the room that had sparked the terrifying visions that became one of the most famous horror novels of all time. I took the elevator to the second floor, the ride up feeling longer than it should have. When the doors finally opened, I stepped into a hallway that seemed to stretch on endlessly. Finding my room, I hesitated for a moment before inserting the key. The door creaked open, revealing a space that was surprisingly cozy. The decor was a blend of vintage and modern, with a plush bed and a large window offering a stunning view of the mountains. Yet, despite its comfort, there was an undeniable heaviness in the air, as if the room itself was aware of its infamous reputation. I unpacked my things and decided to explore the hotel. The hallways were lined with photographs and memorabilia, chronicling the history of the Stanley and its many famous guests. As I wandered, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every so often, I would turn, expecting to see someone behind me, but there was never anyone there. Eventually, I found myself in the hotel's bar, a cozy room with a roaring fire and an assortment of patrons. I ordered a drink and took a seat by the fire, hoping to ease the tension that had been building within me since my arrival. As I sipped my whiskey, I struck up a conversation with the bartender, a middle-aged man with a friendly demeanor. "First time here?" he asked, polishing a glass as he spoke. "Yeah," I replied. "I've always been interested in the history and the stories." He chuckled. "You've picked an interesting place for sure. Lots of stories here, and not all of them are just stories, if you catch my drift." I leaned in, intrigued. "Have you seen anything yourself?" He paused, looking thoughtful. "I've been here a long time. Seen things I can't quite explain. Heard voices when no one's around, seen shadows moving in empty rooms. But the strangest thing happened just last week. A guest came running down from the second floor, said she saw a woman in her room. Described her in detail, a maid from the early 1900s, by her dress. Said the woman just vanished into thin air. A chill ran down my spine. And this was in room 217? He nodded slowly. That's right. Seems that room has a life of its own. I finished my drink, trying to digest what he had told me. The stories were fascinating, but now that I was here, experiencing the atmosphere of the Stanley firsthand, they took on a new level of reality. I thanked the bartender and decided to retire to my room, feeling a mix of excitement and dread. As I made my way back, the hallways seemed even longer and darker than before. Reaching room 217, I fumbled with the key, my hands suddenly unsteady. Once inside, I locked the door behind me and took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. I glanced around, half expecting to see the ghostly maid the bartender had mentioned, but the room was empty. I settled into bed, the weight of the day's events pressing down on me. As I lay there, the silence of the room became almost oppressive, every creak and groan of the old building amplified in the darkness. Just as I was beginning to drift off, I heard it, a faint whisper, just on the edge of my hearing. "Welcome," it seemed to say, the word lingering in the air. My heart pounded in my chest as I sat up, straining to hear more. But the room was silent once again, the whisper fading into the night. I lay back down, my mind racing. The Stanley Hotel had lived up to its reputation, and I had a feeling that this was only the beginning of my encounter with its haunted history. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of birds chirping outside my window. The unease of the previous night seemed distant in the daylight, replaced by a sense of curiosity and anticipation. I was determined to uncover more about the hotel's ghostly inhabitants. After a quick breakfast in the hotel's elegant dining room, I decided to join one of the guided tours that promised to delve into the Stanley's haunted history. Our tour guide, a lively woman named Linda, gathered the group in the lobby and began with a brief history of the hotel. She spoke of its founder, F.O. Stanley, and the many celebrities who had graced its halls. As you may know, Linda said, her voice taking on a more serious tone, the Stanley Hotel is not just known for its luxurious accommodations. Many guests and staff members have reported encounters with the supernatural. Some say the spirits of former guests and employees still roam these halls. She led us through the hotel's corridors, pointing out areas of particular interest. We paused outside room 217, and Linda recounted the story of Stephen King's stay and the experiences that had inspired The Shining. As she spoke, I couldn't help but feel a connection to the room I had slept in, the room that seemed to hold so many secrets. Our tour continued to the ballroom, where Linda told us of ghostly parties that could be heard echoing through the night, long after the living had retired to their rooms. She spoke of the grand piano that played itself and the apparitions seen dancing under the chandeliers. The stories were fascinating, and I felt a growing sense of awe and trepidation. As the tour concluded, Linda encouraged us to explore the hotel on our own. I decided to take her advice and headed to the 4th floor, known for its high concentration of paranormal activity. The hallways here felt even more oppressive, the air thick with an unseen presence. I wandered down the corridor, my footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. Suddenly, I heard a faint giggle, like that of a child, coming from one of the rooms. I stopped, my heart racing, and listened intently. The giggle came again, followed by the sound of tiny footsteps. I followed the noise to a door marked 401. Hesitating for a moment, I knocked lightly. The door creaked open, revealing an empty room. I stepped inside, the air noticeably cooler. The room was simple, with a small bed and an antique dresser. As I looked around, I felt a sudden chill and saw, out of the corner of my eye, a small figure dart behind the bed. I approached cautiously, but there was no one there. The room was empty, yet I could still feel the presence of something, or someone. I left the room, my mind buzzing with questions. Who was the child I had heard? What other spirits lingered in the shadows of the Stanley Hotel? As the day wore on, I continued to explore, each room and hallway offering new mysteries and eerie encounters. By evening, I was exhausted, but my curiosity was far from satisfied. I returned to room 217, determined to document my experiences and perhaps uncover more about the hotel's haunted past. Sitting at the small desk by the window, I began to write, the events of the day flowing onto the pages of my journal. The room was quiet, the only sound the occasional creak of the floorboards. Just as I finished recounting my encounter on the 4th floor, I heard it again, the faint whisper from the night before. "Help me," the voice seemed to say, barely audible but unmistakable. I froze, the pen slipping from my fingers. The whisper came again, more insistent this time. "Help me." My heart pounded as I scanned the room, searching for the source of the voice. The air grew colder, and I felt a presence behind me. Slowly, I turned, and there, standing in the shadows, was the faint outline of a woman. She wore a maid's uniform, her eyes filled with a sorrow that seemed to transcend time. Before I could react, she vanished, leaving me alone in the room, the echo of her plea lingering in the air. My mind raced, filled with questions and a growing sense of urgency. Who was she? What did she need help with? I knew I had to find out. The Stanley Hotel had revealed only a glimpse of its secrets, and I was determined to uncover the rest, no matter what it took. The following day, I decided to focus my investigation on room 217 and its spectral inhabitant. I started by visiting the hotel's library, hoping to find any historical records or old photographs that might shed light on the mysterious maid. The library was a quiet, dimly lit room filled with the scent of old books and polished wood. It seemed the perfect place to uncover secrets long buried. I approached the librarian, an elderly woman with kind eyes and a wealth of knowledge about the hotel. I explained my interest in the hotel's history and the ghostly maid I had encountered. She nodded thoughtfully and led me to a section filled with old ledgers and guest books dating back to the early 1900s. Many guests have reported seeing her over the years, the librarian said as she handed me a particularly old ledger. She's believed to be Elizabeth Wilson, one of our maids who had a rather tragic accident in room 217. My heart quickened as I opened the ledger, carefully turning the fragile pages. There, among the records of guests and staff, I found her name. Elizabeth Wilson. The entry detailed her unfortunate accident. She had been lighting lanterns in room 217 when a gas leak caused an explosion. Remarkably, she survived but suffered severe injuries. I spent hours poring over the old books, piecing together Elizabeth's story. She had been a dedicated maid, well liked by guests and staff alike. After her recovery, she returned to work at the Stanley, her resilience becoming a part of the hotel's lore. But it seemed her spirit had never left, bound to the place where she had experienced such trauma. Armed with this new knowledge, I felt a renewed determination to communicate with Elizabeth's spirit. That evening, I returned to room 217, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and excitement. I sat on the bed, the room eerily silent around me, and spoke softly, hoping to reach her. "Elizabeth, I know what happened to you," I said, my voice trembling. "I want to help you. Please, if you can, show me how." For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, a chill swept through the room, and I heard her voice, clearer than before. "Help me find peace," she whispered. I felt a shiver run down my spine. "How can I help you, Elizabeth? What do you need?" The air grew colder still, and I saw her again, her form more distinct than before. She looked at me with sad eyes, her voice filled with sorrow. "My family, I never got to say goodbye. They need to know I'm at peace." Tears welled up in my eyes as I realized the depth of her anguish. "I'll help you, Elizabeth. I promise." With a nod, she faded away, leaving me alone with a sense of purpose. I knew what I had to do. The next step was to find her descendants and relay her message. It wouldn't be easy, but it was the least I could do to help her find the peace she so desperately sought. The following morning, I began my search for Elizabeth's family. Using the hotel's records and some online genealogy resources, I traced her lineage to a small town not far from the hotel. I contacted a local historian, who was able to provide me with the current whereabouts of Elizabeth's great-grandchildren. I reached out to them, explaining my mission and the unusual circumstances that had brought me to them. To my surprise, they were receptive and agreed to meet with me. We arranged to gather at the hotel the next day, hoping that this reunion might finally bring Elizabeth the peace she longed for. As I waited for them to arrive, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. Would this really work? Would Elizabeth finally be able to move on? Only time would tell, but I was determined to see it through, for her sake and for the sake of the countless others who had felt her presence. The day of the meeting arrived, and I found myself pacing nervously in the hotel's lobby. Elizabeth's great-grandchildren, Emily and James, arrived promptly. They were a friendly, middle-aged couple with an air of curiosity and apprehension. After brief introductions, I led them to a quiet corner of the hotel's sitting room, where we could talk without interruptions. "I know this might sound strange," I began, "but I've been staying in room 217, and I've had some experiences. I believe your great-grandmother, Elizabeth Wilson, is still present in the hotel." Emily and James exchanged glances, their skepticism evident. I continued, recounting my encounters with Elizabeth's spirit and the information I had uncovered about her accident and subsequent return to work at the Stanley. As I spoke, their expressions softened, shifting from doubt to a mixture of awe and sadness. "She told me she never got to say goodbye," I said gently. "She wants you to know she's at peace but needs closure with her family." Emily wiped a tear from her eye. "We've always heard stories about great-grandma Elizabeth, but we never imagined she might still be here, in some way." James nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for telling us. We always felt a connection to this place, but now it makes sense." We decided to visit room 217 together, hoping that their presence might help Elizabeth find the peace she sought. As we ascended the stairs, the air grew colder, the weight of unseen eyes upon us. We reached the room, and I unlocked the door, feeling the familiar chill as we stepped inside. Emily and James stood in the center of the room, looking around as if trying to sense their great-grandmother's presence. I spoke softly, addressing Elizabeth. "Elizabeth, your family is here. They've come to say goodbye." The room grew colder still, and the lights flickered. Emily gasped, clutching James's arm, as a faint outline appeared before us. Elizabeth stood there, her face softening as she saw her descendants. Her eyes filled with tears, and she reached out a translucent hand. "My family," she whispered, her voice filled with a mix of joy and sorrow. Emily stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "Great-grandma, we love you. We've always felt your presence with us. We hope you can find peace now." Elizabeth smiled, a look of profound relief washing over her features. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for coming." As her form began to fade, The room warmed slightly, the oppressive weight lifting. Elizabeth's spirit seemed to dissolve into the air, leaving behind a sense of calm and closure. Emily and James stood there, holding each other, their eyes filled with tears but also with a sense of peace. We left room 217, the air feeling lighter and the hotel somehow less foreboding. I thanked Emily and James for their openness and willingness to help. As they departed, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that Elizabeth had finally found the closure she needed. That night, as I lay in bed, I no longer felt the weight of unseen eyes or the chill of an uninvited presence. The Stanley Hotel had revealed many of its secrets to me, and I felt a deep connection to the history and the spirits that lingered there. My journey into the haunted heart of the Stanley Hotel was far from over, but I knew that I had made a difference, however small, in the lives of those who had walked its halls before me. The following days at the Stanley Hotel passed in a strange blur of normalcy and lingering mystery. With Elizabeth's spirit seemingly at peace, the oppressive atmosphere in room 217 had lifted, replaced by a curious tranquility. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that the hotel held more secrets, more spirits waiting to tell their stories. Determined to uncover more, I delved deeper into the hotel's history, speaking with longtime staff members and local historians. Each conversation revealed new layers of the Stanley's past, tales of tragedy and joy, of life and death intertwined within its walls. One evening, I found myself in the hotel's lounge, flipping through a collection of old photographs when an elderly man approached me. His name was Thomas, a former employee of the Stanley who had retired many years ago but often returned to visit. "You seem very interested in the hotel's history," he said, his voice raspy with age. "I've seen many like you, but few with your determination." I smiled, grateful for his attention. "There's so much here, so many stories. I feel like I've only scratched the surface." Thomas nodded, his eyes distant as if recalling memories long forgotten. The Stanley has always had a way of drawing people in, revealing itself in layers. "But there's one story you should know, one that few talk about." Intrigued, I leaned in closer. "What story is that?" He sighed, glancing around as if ensuring no one else could hear. "It's about Lucy, a young girl who lived here many years ago. She wasn't an official guest, more of a wanderer who found refuge within these walls. The staff took care of her, and she became a part of the hotel in a way." "What happened to her?" I asked, sensing the weight of his words. Thomas's expression darkened. "Lucy disappeared one night, without a trace. Some say she ran away, others believe something more sinister happened. But many of us who worked here felt her presence long after she was gone. Whispers in the hallways, fleeting glimpses of a young girl in a pink dress." My heart raced at the thought of another spirit lingering in the hotel. "Do you think she's still here?" Thomas nodded slowly. "I do. And I believe she has a story to tell. One that needs to be heard." That night, I couldn't sleep. Lucy's tale haunted my thoughts, and I felt a compelling need to find her, to understand what had happened. I decided to explore the areas of the hotel where she was most often seen, starting with the basement, a place known for its eerie ambience and unexplained phenomena. Armed with a flashlight, I ventured into the dimly lit basement. The air was thick with dust, the walls lined with old, forgotten furniture and artifacts. As I moved deeper into the darkness, I felt a familiar chill, a sense of being watched. "Lucy," I called softly, my voice echoing off the walls. "I'm here to help. Can you show me where you are?" For a moment, there was only silence. Then, faintly, I heard it, the sound of soft footsteps, like those of a child. I followed the noise, my heart pounding, until I reached an old storage room. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a space cluttered with old trunks and boxes. In the corner of the room, I saw her. A young girl in a pink dress, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. She looked at me, and I felt a connection, a deep understanding of her pain. "Lucy," I whispered, stepping closer. "What happened to you?" She pointed to a trunk in the corner, her form flickering as if struggling to remain visible. I approached the trunk and opened it, revealing a collection of old letters and photographs. Among them was a diary, its pages filled with a child's handwriting. As I read through the diary, Lucy's story unfolded. She had indeed found refuge in the hotel, but her life had been filled with hardship and loneliness. The staff had cared for her, but one night she had ventured into the basement, following a strange noise, and never returned. The diary hinted at someone she feared, a shadowy figure who had haunted her dreams. Tears filled my eyes as I realized the depth of her suffering. "I'm so sorry, Lucy," I said, my voice trembling. "I promise I'll make sure your story is known." Lucy smiled faintly, her form becoming more solid for a brief moment. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Thank you for listening." As she faded away, the air in the room grew warmer, the oppressive weight lifting. I knew what I had to do: share Lucy's story, ensure that she was remembered, and bring closure to her restless spirit. The next morning, I spoke with the hotel manager, sharing what I had discovered. Together, we decided to create a small memorial for Lucy, a way to honor her memory and acknowledge the hotel's complex history. The diary and photographs would be preserved, displayed in a place where guests could learn about her life. As the memorial took shape, I felt a sense of peace, knowing that Lucy's story would be told. The Stanley Hotel had revealed yet another of its secrets, and I was grateful to have been a part of it. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt a profound sense of connection to the hotel and its many spirits. My journey into the haunted heart of the Stanley Hotel was far from over, but I knew that I had made a difference, however small, in the lives of those who had walked its halls before me. The creation of Lucy's memorial brought a renewed sense of purpose to my stay at the Stanley Hotel. The hotel's atmosphere seemed lighter, as if the act of honoring her memory had lifted some of the lingering shadows. But despite the newfound peace, I couldn't shake the feeling that there were still more stories to uncover. One evening, as I walked through the grand lobby, I was approached by a woman named Margaret, a guest who had heard of my investigations. She had a look of urgency and worry in her eyes. "I've heard about what you did for Elizabeth and Lucy," she said. "I think you might be able to help me. My husband, Jack, and I have been experiencing some strange things in our room, and it's starting to frighten us." Intrigued, I agreed to speak with her and her husband. They led me to their room on the third floor, room 324, a space filled with a sense of unease. Jack, a tall man with a stern demeanor, looked visibly shaken. "It's been happening every night," he explained. "We hear knocking on the walls, footsteps in the hall, and once I even saw a shadow move across the room. We're not the kind to believe in ghosts, but this is something else." I listened carefully, noting the details of their experiences. It seemed that the third floor had its own share of mysteries, and I was determined to uncover the source of their disturbances. That night, I decided to stay in room 324 with Margaret and Jack's permission, hoping to witness the phenomena firsthand. As the night wore on, the room remained eerily quiet. I was beginning to think nothing would happen when, suddenly, I heard it, a soft, rhythmic knocking on the walls. My heart raced as I listened, trying to determine its source. The knocking grew louder, more insistent, and I felt a chill in the air. "Is anyone there?" I called out, my voice steady despite my fear. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a soft voice replied, "Help me." The same plea I had heard in room 217. I felt a familiar chill run down my spine. "Who are you?" I asked. The voice was faint, almost a whisper. "Thomas." My mind raced. Thomas? Could it be the same Thomas I had spoken to in the lounge, the former employee? I needed to find out more. The next morning, I returned to the lounge, hoping to find him again, but he was nowhere to be seen. I spoke with the staff, describing Thomas, but none of them seemed to know of a former employee by that name. Puzzled, I decided to investigate further. I returned to the library, searching through old employee records. To my surprise, I found an entry for a Thomas Hargrove, a former bellhop who had worked at the Stanley in the 1920s. According to the records, Thomas had mysteriously disappeared one night, and his body was never found. As I read through the details of his disappearance, I felt a deep sense of sorrow. Thomas had been a dedicated employee, well liked by his colleagues. His disappearance had left a void in the hotel's history, a mystery unsolved. Determined to communicate with Thomas's spirit, I returned to room 324 that evening, this time armed with a notebook and a pen. I sat quietly, waiting for the familiar knocking. When it began, I spoke softly. "Thomas, I know what happened to you. I'm here to help. Please, tell me what you need." The knocking ceased, and the air grew colder. I felt a presence in the room, a sense of sadness and longing. The pen in my hand began to move, as if guided by an unseen force. Words appeared on the paper, "Find my resting place." I shivered, understanding the gravity of his request. Thomas's spirit was trapped, unable to find peace until his body was discovered. I needed to find out where he had been last seen. The hotel records mentioned that Thomas had been delivering a guest's luggage to the basement on the night he disappeared. The basement. The same place where I had encountered Lucy's spirit. I returned there, my heart pounding with anticipation. The dimly lit space felt more oppressive than ever, the air thick with the weight of unsolved mysteries. As I searched through the cluttered storage rooms, I noticed an old, locked door at the far end of the basement, partially hidden behind a stack of crates. I managed to pry the door open, revealing a narrow passageway that led to a small, forgotten room. In the corner of the room, covered in dust and cobwebs, lay an old trunk. With trembling hands, I opened it, revealing the skeletal remains of a man. My heart ached as I realized I had found Thomas's resting place. I informed the hotel manager, and together we arranged for a proper burial for Thomas. As his remains were laid to rest, I felt a profound sense of closure. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt a warmth in the air, a sense of peace that had been absent before. The Stanley Hotel had revealed its final secret to me, and I knew that Thomas, like Elizabeth and Lucy, had finally found peace. My journey into the haunted heart of the Stanley Hotel had come to an end, but the connections I had made and the stories I had uncovered would stay with me forever. As I packed my bags and prepared to leave the Stanley, I took one last look around the room. The sense of peace was palpable, a testament to the power of understanding and compassion. I had come to the Stanley Hotel seeking stories of the past, and I had found them, along with a deeper connection to the spirits that still lingered there. The drive down the mountain road felt different this time, lighter somehow. The Stanley Hotel had left its mark on me, and I knew I would never forget the experiences I had there. As I drove away, the hotel stood tall against the backdrop of the Rockies, a beacon of history and mystery, its stories forever etched in my heart.